For decades, driving has been more than just a way to get from one place to another for older Australians. It's been a symbol of independence, freedom, and staying connected to the people and places you love. But in 2025, significant changes are being rolled out across Australia that could impact how seniors over 60 keep their driver's license. And the updates are not just minor tweaks. Authorities in several states and territories are introducing tighter rules on medical assessments, license renewals, and age-based restrictions, and the changes are sparking a lot of debate. For some, it feels like common-sense safety measures. For others, it's a worrying sign that their right to drive could be taken away sooner than expected. Under these new rules, drivers in certain age brackets will face more frequent medical checks to ensure they are fit to drive, checks that can include vision tests, reaction time assessments, and in some cases, detailed medical reports from your GP. In places like New South Wales and Queensland, seniors over 75 have already been undergoing annual medicals, but now there is talk of lowering that threshold to 70, and in a few cases, even earlier. South Australia and Victoria are considering changes that would make medical reviews mandatory for more drivers over 60, particularly those with health conditions that could affect safe driving. It's not just about passing or failing a test. These changes could mean being restricted to driving only during certain hours, being limited to specific areas, or even being required to switch to smaller, less powerful vehicles. Authorities argue this is about keeping everyone safe on the road as our population ages. But many seniors feel the system risks being too rigid, treating healthy, experienced drivers the same as those with serious medical conditions. If you or someone you love is approaching these new age thresholds, you need to understand exactly what's changing, what your rights are, and how to prepare so you can keep your independence for as long as possible. Now, let's break down what's really going on behind these changes so you can see the full picture, not just the headlines. Many seniors I've spoken to say the first thing they feel when they hear about new rules is a mix of confusion and worry, especially when it comes to something as personal as driving. It's not just about convenience. For many, the car is a lifeline. It's how you get to the shops, the doctor, church, or your grandkid's house. It's the freedom to go somewhere on a whim, to take the coastal drive on a sunny day, or to help a neighbor in an emergency without having to check bus timetables or rely on others. So when governments talk about tightening rules for older drivers, it's no surprise that emotions run high. The push for these changes comes from several directions. Road safety authorities have been looking closely at accident statistics and have noticed certain patterns with age. They point out that, as we get older, certain physical changes, like slower reaction times, reduced peripheral vision, or health conditions that affect alertness, can make driving more challenging. While that's true for some people, it's also important to remember that older drivers often have decades of experience, tend to be more cautious, and generally avoid risky behavior on the road. In fact, in many cases, younger drivers are statistically more likely to be in accidents. But because road safety is a politically sensitive topic, especially when there are accidents involving seniors, governments tend to act quickly, sometimes in ways that feel overly broad. One of the biggest changes on the table is the expansion of mandatory medical assessments. In states like New South Wales, once you hit 75, you already have to pass a yearly medical check to keep your license. In Queensland, similar rules apply, and in the Act, it starts at 75 as well. But what's being discussed now is lowering that age threshold, possibly to 70, or even to 65 in certain high-risk categories. This doesn't necessarily mean you'll be forced to take a full driving test again, but it could mean more frequent trips to your GP or specialist for clearance. These assessments often include eyesight checks, which are fairly straightforward, but they can also involve reaction time tests, mobility checks, and questions about your medications. If you've got conditions like diabetes, heart disease, arthritis, or neurological issues, you may be referred for more specialized assessments. Here's where it gets tricky. The outcome of these medical reviews isn't just pass or fail. In some cases, you might be issued with a conditional license. That means you're still allowed to drive, but with restrictions. You might be limited to driving only during daylight hours, only within a certain radius of your home, or only in vehicles under a specific size or weight. For some, this is a fair compromise. It allows them to keep driving for essential trips while reducing risk. But for others, especially those in rural or regional areas where public transport is minimal, These restrictions can be incredibly disruptive. Imagine living 40 kilometers from the nearest hospital and being told you can only drive within 10 kilometers of your house. It's not just inconvenient, it can be life-changing. Victoria has been reviewing its own older driver policies, and there's been talk about introducing more consistent, nationwide rules. Right now, the requirements vary significantly from state to state, which can be confusing for people who move interstate or spend part of the year in another region. Western Australia, for example, already requires annual medicals from 80, while South Australia starts at 75. Tasmania has a similar system, but the frequency and exact nature of the tests can differ. What's being proposed is a more unified national framework, where the same rules would apply everywhere, making it easier for people to know exactly what's expected of them no matter where they live. But why now? Part of the reason is demographic. Australia's population is aging faster than ever before, and the number of drivers over 65 is at an all-time high. Many of these drivers are healthier and more active than past generations, and they expect to keep driving well into their 80s and even 90s. This is a good thing. It shows we're living longer, healthier lives, but it also means the transport system needs to adapt. Politicians and road safety experts argue that more regular health checks are simply a way to keep up with this reality. Of course, not everyone is convinced. Some senior advocacy groups argue that the focus on older drivers is misplaced. They point to research showing that older drivers are less likely to engage in dangerous driving behaviors such as speeding, drink driving, or using their phones while driving. They also note that in many cases, when older drivers are involved in accidents, they are not the ones at fault. These groups warn that blanket policies could unfairly penalize safe drivers just because of their age, and they call for a more individualized approach, one that focuses on actual driving performance rather than age alone. For many seniors, the process itself can feel intimidating. The idea of going to your GP and having your driving ability assessed can be nerve-wracking, especially if you've been driving for decades without a problem. There's often a fear that if you mention a health issue, even something minor, your license will be taken away. This can lead to people hiding symptoms or avoiding doctor's appointments altogether, which isn't good for anyone. The truth is, most GPs want to keep their patients independent for as long as possible, and they only recommend license restrictions if they genuinely believe it's necessary for safety. Still, the anxiety is real, and part of the challenge is making sure seniors understand their rights and the actual process. So, what does a medical assessment for driving typically involve? In most cases, it starts with a standard health check. Your GP will ask about your medical history, current medications, and any recent changes in your health. They'll usually test your vision and hearing, check your reflexes, and ask you about your daily activities. If you've had falls, blackouts, or episodes of confusion, they'll want to know more. Depending on your situation, they might refer you to an optometrist, occupational therapist, or specialist for further assessment. The whole idea is to determine whether you can continue to drive safely, not to catch you out. If you are issued with a conditional license, it's important to understand exactly what that means. Conditions can include driving only during daylight hours, avoiding high-speed roads, or not driving in heavy traffic. These conditions are usually tailored to your specific needs and limitations, and they can sometimes be lifted if your health improves. The key is to stay proactive, keep your health in check, follow your doctor's advice, and don't let the fear of assessments stop you from addressing any medical issues early. Another big part of the conversation around these new rules is technology. Modern cars are packed with features designed to help drivers stay safe. Things like lane departure warnings, automatic emergency braking, blind spot monitoring, and adaptive cruise control. For seniors, these features can make a big difference in extending safe driving years. Some experts believe that instead of focusing solely on age-based medical checks, we should also be encouraging older drivers to upgrade to vehicles with these safety technologies. The challenge, of course, is cost. Not everyone can afford a new car, and many seniors are on fixed incomes. There have been suggestions that government incentives or subsidies could help older Australians access safer vehicles, but so far, these ideas haven't been widely adopted. Public transport is another factor. In metropolitan areas, losing your license might be inconvenient but manageable. You can still get around by train, tram, or bus. But in regional and rural Australia, where public transport is scarce or non-existent, it's a completely different story. Seniors in these areas often rely on their cars, not just for social activities, but for essential services like medical appointments and grocery shopping. Policymakers know this, but balancing safety concerns with the realities of rural life isn't easy. Some regions have introduced community transport services for seniors, but these are often limited in scope and availability. At the heart of this issue is the question of independence. Driving isn't just about mobility, it's about dignity, self-reliance, and quality of life. When rules change, especially in a way that feels like they're singling out older people, it can feel like an attack on those values. That's why it's so important to stay informed and involved in the conversation. Understanding exactly what's changing, why it's changing, and how it will affect you is the first step in making sure you can adapt without losing your freedom. In the next part of our discussion, we'll look at how you can prepare for these changes in practical terms. Things like staying on top of your health, keeping your skills sharp, and knowing your options if your license does end up being restricted or revoked. Because while the rules may be changing, there's still a lot you can do to stay in the driver's seat, literally and figuratively, for as long as possible.